an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering A Wizard Alone by Diane Duane. Chapters 1 and 2, although you wouldn't know it because she doesn't number her chapters. Diane, please, help a girl out. Consultations and investigations. In these chapters, it turns out Nita's mother died between books, and she is coping with some acute grief. And also, there is a new wizard on the scene who needs some help getting through his ordeal. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Kelly for commissioning this episode. Kelly is here in the chat. She says, "Hi, thank you so much for doing this." Thank you for commissioning this, Kelly. This is all you. So, guys, I am really, I feel like a bit of a fucking dunce because I should have seen that her mother was going to be dead by the beginning of the next book based on the way the last book ended. But I just kind of thought she was safe for 2 more books and then we'd cope with her death. And I am not ready for grieving Nita. This author, when she talks about grief, it is so clear she knows what the fuck she's talking about. She knows whereof she speaks. And grief is such a layered, frustrating thing. And I personally, people talk about how it gets easier with time, and that's certainly true, but that makes it sound like the grief lessens with time, and it's really not that. It's more like you, grief is like weightlifting, where the weights don't get any lighter, but you begin to be able to carry them more easily. It's just the same. It never actually changes, but you get more used to living with that grief in your life, and you just kind of make room for it, and you just address that it's there, and accept that that's how it's going to be. And that's the part I think most of us struggle with the most, is we want to get through our grief, past it, to back to normalcy again. And really, that isn't ever going to be possible. Most of the time, if you're dealing with acute grief, your life won't ever be the same again. That's just it. And you can't expect it to be, and wanting it to be and struggling to get back to that is going to be part of what makes it more painful than otherwise, That's part of why acceptance is one of the grieving steps. But that's one thing to know and to say, and that's another thing to live. And Nita, this is clearly her first personal great loss in this way. She's been through a ton and seen people die, in the midst of several of these books so far. But this is the first personal death, and it was not related to wizardry. It was just life. And that just makes it feel a little bit less like there was a reason for it. If somebody dies in the face of evil because they're standing up against it, that's one thing. And granted, we do see a little bit of that at the end of the last book with her mother. But when it's just because cancer got her, it just feels so pointless, So yeah, like I said, I'm not ready to deal with this yet at all. Let's start talking about this from the beginning, though. I would like to mention, let me see if I have my phone here. I took a screenshot because, these books in particular are a struggle for me to parcel out into readable chunks, because you guys know I like to do about 50 pages per episode. And Diane Duane, not only does she not number her chapters, but up until the last couple books, the page numbers weren't correct either. Now they are, but her pages are pretty long. Or her chapters, my bad. Her chapters are pretty long. So I wound up taking a screenshot of all of the like chapters. And I don't think you can see it actually because it's on my phone. But I'll post it somewhere that you guys can see. And divided it up as closely as I could, 250 chapters. There are going to be some weeks when I'm a little over, and there are going to be some weeks where I'm kind of a lot under. And I don't want to stop reading mid-chapter. I feel like that's going to get too confusing. And I do tend to run over time when I talk about these books. So I think going with less is going to be okay. So in the interest of upcoming episodes, because we have this one, and then we have one in March 9th, almost a month away. Those are the only two that have been booked. I'm already getting booked into May. So just a warning to everybody who likes these. You may want to look into commissioning an episode, because if I go too long between, I'm going to have to cancel the series. I almost did already. And I really would rather not, because I think that these books are great and they deserve the attention. But this first section covered 57 pages, so I was over. The next section is only going to be like 40-something pages, and it's roughly around that. So if anybody is interested, I'll post the screenshot so that you guys can follow along and understand how I'm trying to split this up. Anyway, so that's enough business. Let's talk about what happens. So the first, this really is much more focused on Kit this time. And I'm prepared for that. You know, the last book is really kind of Nita grappling with some stuff, and she's the one that's got the major tragedy on her hands. And it's not that Kit isn't there for her, but he's much more on an adventure, and it doesn't feel quite the same with him. So she's experiencing a bit of a sudden growing up, and I'm sort of expecting that this book is going to be similar for Kit, that he's going to experience some growing up as well in the course of the story. So this chapter, Consultations, starts out with Kit trying to get his TV remote and the DVD player and the television to all work together. This is so hilarious. I love this like really common everyday problem being translated into something magical, because it makes it so much funnier. And this is something I'm going to try and keep in mind the next time that I'm attempting to program some stuff. You guys, I like splurged a little last week and bought myself a pair of Bluetooth headphones to use while I record instead of these, because the cord on this isn't that long. And these Bluetooth headphones were such a goddamn nightmare. They were supposed to be like a treat, and they just kept disconnecting. They would randomly connect to like one particular browser tab, but it wouldn't be connected to, for example, the phone call that I was on. So I would be able to hear a video on Facebook playing, but I couldn't hear the person I was talking to. Shit that made no sense, that it's like I didn't even know that that could happen. And I tried everything, and I finally just packed those motherfuckers back up and taped them shut, and I was like, oh, and return these, please. Here's the tag, bring it to UPS, I never want to see it again. Because there's just a point at which, it's supposed to be for the convenience, and it's doing the opposite of that. And there's a really beautiful moment where Kit daydreams about how in the future everything's going to connect seamlessly and it's going to be so perfect. And I will say, most of the time, Bluetooth works beautifully, and I'm impressed by it all the time. I'm just like, wow, this shit is crazy that we can do this. But every now and then, I'm just like, what even are we doing? What is this? Oh my God, just don't offer it. Don't pretend that you can do it when we all know you can't. Devin says, wireless anything is legit not as good as you think it should be. See, that is not my experience with my regular Bluetooth headphones. And I will show you these on camera, guys. These jobbies cost me $9.99 at Walmart and have been champs, total workhorses for me. I love these. The Bluetooth ones that I got for recording were like $120. They were an investment. I was hesitant to buy them. and they turned out to be trash. So, it's just, they say you get what you pay for, and oftentimes that's true, but not always. Sometimes things that are more expensive are worse. So yeah, that's, this whole bit with like the ongoing struggle between the two of them is so funny. And then eventually he gets them to function with each other, but they decide to show like alien cable channels instead of the regular ones. And it's pure spite because they're conscious objects. They are not inanimate. And so they're choosing to basically obey the like letter of the law, which is function. But they, in spirit, are still giving Kit the finger by being like, I'll function, but not well. I'm not going to do what you want, so better deal with it. And I think that shit is hilarious. I love that. Maybe that just says something about me. So be it. That's fine. So Devin says, my earbuds cannot keep connected to my phone if I want to go for a walk, and they're Samsung. Do you mean if you walk too far away from your phone? Or do you mean if you go for a walk with your phone, they don't stay connected? I don't think anybody listening cares. I'm sorry, Devin. I'm realizing that I'm getting into a whole conversation. That's not what people are here for. But still answer my question because I want to know. So, again, I also really enjoy the fact that Kit's parents are getting slightly more involved. They had a harder time than Nita's parents with accepting all of this. And they're really starting to treat it much more like just, this is what he does. This is his hobby kind of thing, So I'm trying to find the spot where that sort of gets resolved. Oh my God. And then, his Ponch is asking his mother what the meaning of life is. Give him a dog biscuit and tell him it's an allegory. This turns out to be a bad idea because he's basically training other dogs to do the same thing. And this becomes a running joke, and I'm sure it's going to come up yet again. Let's see. My phone is in my pocket, my earbuds are in my ears, and they keep cutting out. It is ridiculous. Yeah, you need to get these $10 Walmart jobbies, and you won't have that problem. Just, Oh, and also has AirPods, and he loves them. He's mad at how much they cost, but he also admits they were worth the money. So sometimes that's also very annoying when you're you didn't want to spend it, and then you realize after why they're that much. So I'm thinking the ones I return, I may replace with AirPods, but we'll see. So let's see. I'm sorry guys. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't want to dwell too long on the deal with the DVD player, but it is a sizable chunk of the opening chapter. And I don't mean that in a way that's derogatory. I thought it was entertaining and I read through it and I wasn't bored, but in recounting it, there's really not that much to say about it. So we're in trouble when even a remote control has its own manual, he thought. But if a wizard with a bent toward mechanical things couldn't get this kind of very basic problem sorted out, then there really would be trouble. The manual said nothing about whether the manufacturer actually had made all the main parts itself. And he starts working with them again, and apparently the objects are both yelling at each other, and his sister overhears them. And they're talking in this speech, so they don't entirely understand what's being said, but there's a tone to it that I think they pick up. Because his sister says, "Ooh, what a nasty mouth." Kit was inclined to agree. He spent an annoying couple of moments searching for the volume control on the DVD. Then he figures out the processor wasn't made by the company that owned the brand. He had a look at the same information for the remote. It also used the same processor, but it had been resold to the brand name company by still another company. Now look at that, Kit said. You have the same processors. You aren't really from different companies at all. You're long-lost brothers. Isn't that nice? And look at you, fighting over nothing. She's right, you are idiots. Now I want you guys to handshake and make up. So I'm wondering if this is going to be something that's a bit of like an analogy for later on in the story, because what we find out a while later into the second chapter is that the wizard that's struggling to deal with his ordeal has either got autism or he has something that manifests as looking like autism. And I'm wondering if there's going to be something about like the processes and, you know, the way that these things like were acting like they couldn't see eye to eye, but it turns out that if you get past that, we're the same. I don't know. I might be grasping at straws, but it feels like this has to be purposeful to have this start off this way and to spend so much time on it. From the back door at the far side of the kitchen came a scratching noise. And Punch comes in. I love Punch so much, you guys. I'd kind of forgotten how delightful he is. But he is just, it's a combination of how he's like maturing, you know, and later on Kit says something to him about how he can't bark in here, and Punch is like, what am I, an idiot? Yeah, I can't bark when we're under fucking cover, pretending that we're like, and we're invisible, pretending we're not even here. Wow, thank you for informing me of that. He doesn't say all that, but there's a sense of it, you know. Kit realized how thirsty all this talking to machinery had made him. He went to the fridge and rummaged around to see if there was some of his mom's iced tea in there. There wasn't, only a can of the lemon soft drink that Nita particularly liked and that his mom kept for her. The sight of it made Kit briefly uncomfortable, but neither wizardry nor friendship was exclusively about comfort. He took the lemon fizz out, popped the can's top, and took a long swig. Neat? He said silently. Yeah, she said in his mind. There wasn't much enthusiasm there, but there hadn't been much enthusiasm in her about anything for some weeks. At least it wasn't as bad for her now as it had been right after her mother's funeral. But clearly Kit wondered whether the bitter pain she'd been in then was in its way healthier than her current gray, dull tone of mind, like an overcast that showed no signs of lifting. Then he immediately felt guilty for even being tempted to play psychiatrist. She had a right to grieve at whatever speed was right for her. So he asks her what she's doing, and she just says nothing, and he waits for her to follow up on that, and she doesn't. I finished fixing the TV, Kit said, determined to keep the conversation going no matter how uncomfortable it made him. Someone around here had to try to keep at least the appearance of normalcy going. Now I'm bored again, and I want to stay that way for a while. Want to go to the moon? There was a pause. No, Nita said. Thanks, I just don't feel up to it today. And there it was, the sudden hot feeling of eyes filling with tears without warning, and Nita frowning, clenching her eyes shut rather helplessly, unable to stop it, determined to stop it. You go ahead. Thanks, though. She turned away in thought, breaking off the silent communication between them. Kit found that he, too, was scowling against the pain and let out a long breath of aggravation at his own helplessness. Why is it so embarrassing to be sad? He thought, annoyed. And not just for me. Nita's overwhelming pain embarrassed her as badly as it did him, so Kit had to be careful not to notice it. Yet there wasn't anything he seemed able to do for her at the moment. He felt like an idiot, unable to think of anything useful to say, and just as idiotic when he was tempted to keep saying the same things over and over. It'll pass. You'll come out of it eventually. They all sounded heartless and stupid. And besides, how quick would I come out of it if it were my mama who died? So I really love this. I love the fact that this author is choosing to take this event and show us not only how hard it is to go through losing somebody, but how hard it is to try to be there for somebody who has just suffered a major loss. And it's a fucking minefield, you know? You want to be there for the person. You want to show them that you're willing to listen and that you will sit with them and do whatever they need. And yet you don't want to put pressure on them to feel like they have to do anything for your sake. So it's just this sort of balancing act of continually signaling, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, while not pushing them to do more than they're really comfortable with, while not attempting to take up space that isn't meant for you or make it about you, cardinal sin, you know? And it is a really tricky thing to manage. And this is something that happens, especially if your significant other suffers from depression. This is also something that you have to figure out how you're going to cope with it. Owen's been going through a particularly bad patch this past couple weeks, and I try really hard to just be there. And I know that I fall into the trap sometimes of giving advice, and that's not what people necessarily want. Sometimes they do, but unless they really ask for it, it's probably just a good idea to keep that shit to yourself. But I'm such a problem solver type. And you want to say something to people who have suffered a loss. You want to be as he says, it'll pass, you'll come out of it. And the thing is, A, I'm not even totally sure that's true. And B, talking about how it will be isn't actually helpful in the moment. It doesn't change how you're feeling right now. So that isn't actually going to make somebody feel any better. It's almost guaranteed to make them go, so what? Or worse, I wish it was then right now kind of thing. Focus too much on the future and not enough on the present. And that's something that when we are in Nita's POV, she thinks about all the ways that she could sidestep this pain, but how pretty much everything that she has read indicates attempting to do that will just actually make it worse in the end, which tracks, trying to avoid any emotion winds up backfiring. It's just, it never fails. And it's so annoying when that line of why is it so embarrassing to be sad really hit me, because for me, and this is something that I struggle with in general, I grew up trying to take up as little space as possible in terms of the overall effort I cost my parents to raise. I just had a sense growing up that both my parents had enough shit to deal with already on a personal level. I just, as a kid, was very aware of that. And so I tried to make it so that they didn't have to worry about me at all. That was honestly a major part of how I coped with things. And that, as I have gotten older, has begun to manifest in more and more unhelpful ways. I believe that I keep a hold of my sadness and my vulnerability because I don't want to burden other people with it. I don't want to put someone else in the position of having to comfort me. First of all, I don't want them to because it won't work. Second of all, they are oftentimes when somebody attempts to comfort you, it does feel sort of insincere and more like they are trying very hard to end the current discomfort than they are trying to offer solace. And it just feels like demanding labor from somebody who didn't necessarily agree to this. And so I have always been somebody who keeps my feelings to myself and shares it with maybe one or two people in my life. And everybody else gets the joking version of Natasha, not the real sincere version. And that's really mostly been okay for me. It's worked out for the most part. But there are times where I realize if only I were more capable of being emotionally vulnerable, I would be better handling this situation. And I find that a lot with, in friendships. I was talking about this with Owen the other day as well. Our co-host, Krista, has been really isolated during all of COVID. She doesn't live with a roommate, doesn't have a significant other, and has an autoimmune disorder. So she's been like in quarantine very sincerely for almost a year at this point. So we both try and do things to cheer her up, and, you know, it's really been marked this past few weeks how differently we approach that. And I've realized that I have like this perfectionist streak, even with friendships, which is also kind of a mark of not wanting to show your vulnerability, where you want to show people a perfectly polished, finished product because you are afraid of them seeing the seams and seeing that you don't really have it together. So we were going to like do a FaceTime call with her, and I didn't want to, not because I didn't want to talk to her, but because I was worried that having us to speak to for a little while and then us going would make it worse for her than it would to just not speak at all. Very all or nothing kind of thinking. I genuinely was thinking about it in terms of what would be best for her. But on the outside, me choosing not to call, which is what I would have done if Owen hadn't encouraged me to do it, that would just look like you're not being a good friend, you don't care, which is the opposite of true. What it is that I care so much that I overthink things and wind up doing nothing because I'm afraid of making a mistake because I care so much that I don't want to fuck it up. And so I just don't do anything. And that's worse. Hint. So I had a talk with Owen about that and the fact that like he was the one who encouraged me to just do the call. And it really did seem like it meant a lot to her. And I was like, I don't know what my problem is. Of course it was nice for her and I enjoyed talking to her, so I don't know why I'm like this. But I just want to rescue people completely. I want to fix things completely. And if I can't do that, I would rather not do anything because I feel like I'm just bound to make it worse. And it's just so where Kit is right now. And I relate to that so much, wanting to be a good friend and just not really having a clue what is best and how to handle somebody. You know what I mean? And you just desperately want to do the right thing. You really want to do right by your friend. But if you were watching from the outside, you would just seem like a real asshole. And it's... there's a moment here where he's like thankful that his like daily responsibility of contacting her is over with. And then he feels guilty because he's seeing her as a chore. But it is a little bit. It's emotional labor. And it may not be like the kindest way to put it, but it's not something that anybody enjoys, you know, him or Nita. So I don't really blame him for seeing it in that light. It just sucks that this is how it works, you know? Ooh, a lot of comments. Sorry, guys. Mordecai says, I wish I could link an image in this chat. I saw a tweet and saved it discussing how some people hear a problem and then talk about a similar problem they went through to show empathy, and that the person is not alone, but it comes off as making the situation about them instead. Yeah, I do that a lot. I think that for me, when other people do that, it's pretty clear to me that that's what's happening. It's because I have somebody in my life whom I love very much, but who really does make my problems about them. And that has a different feel to it. It's not, oh, I know what you mean. When I went through such and such, it was like this, which sounds like what you're going through. It instead is more like, well, you think that's bad. Let me tell you about this other thing that I went through one time, which is just very different. But yeah, it is something to be aware of, because that's always been my solution, is to try and show somebody that I understand where they're coming from by explaining my experience. And it really can just sound like you're making shit all about you. It's so tricky. Jacob says, I've seen something similar as a neurodivergent style of communication. That makes sense. Kelly says, I lost my dad when I was in the 4th grade, and the response I got from a lot of kids around him being sick and then dying was avoidance. Lots of people trying pointedly to not talk about their own dads or about what happened. No one really knows how to deal with loss, but especially when you're kids. Totally. When you experience profound loss, it can make the people around you realize that they too are going to experience profound loss in their life, and that gets uncomfortable for people. That's definitely part of it. I know myself, I never really knew whether bringing something up was like a bad idea or if, because I didn't want to upset anyone, but also like talking around it felt more obvious. And it was just it is, you want to like, you don't want to make it worse for the person who suffered the loss, and you aren't sure what's going to do that, because for everyone it's different. Some people do want to avoid the topic. Some people would prefer to just not be reminded that they lost somebody if they can help it, and they embrace everyone not bringing it up. And then there are some people who almost find it disrespectful if you don't bring it up, because they are like, that person was a hugely important part of my life, and why are you acting like they weren't even a thing? And Mordecai says, yes, Jacob, there was a lot of discussion about that. I'm neurotypical, but I didn't realize I have a lot of ADHD behaviors because I was raised around it, so it makes sense. Yeah, I am beginning to realize there are a lot of ways that I behave that are really deeply rooted in anxiety and not wanting to be a burden to people. That's where the anxiety really comes from, is like being afraid that I am too needy or just like too much energy, and not wanting to cause that for anybody. And that, I mean, it's reflected in my personal life. It's even reflected in the way that I deal with, like, being at a restaurant or getting a manicure. Just like, I'm paying for a service, but I don't want to be any trouble. And even when I don't get what I paid for, I hesitate to even say anything. It's tough, man. We all have such like weird coping mechanisms that they do tend to work for a little while, which is why we continue to lean on them. But the older you get, the more flaws begin to show up in that particular mode of engagement. And yet by then you've put so much of your weight onto that crutch that switching over to something more healthy seems like it's impossible. Anyway, okay, I'm like half an hour in here and I have barely even gotten past the first section. So, I love this. The phone rang and Carmela just, I got it. Hola, Miguel, Kit. Oh, sorry. Kit. I love this moment so much. She's just expecting a call. Guys, do you remember, those of you who are old enough, before cell phones, I had friends who had like 2 phone lines and they had a phone line in their room, which was just unthinkable. My mother would never. Fighting over the phone line, I can only imagine what it must have been like in a house with multiple like teenagers, because I was an only child and I just still had to fight over my phone, and there were no other teenagers in the house. And one of the things that I remember is in the middle of the night, we couldn't call one another, me and my boyfriend, because it would wake up the house if the phone rang. So what one of us would do would be calling like the movie phone line, and we would be like we would agree to a time. One of us would call the movie phone line and just be on the phone. The other would call our house, and we would hear the beeping in from the other line while we were listening to the movie phone listings. And then we would jump over to the other line. And that way we'd be able to get up on a call at like 11 p.m. without calling one another on the phone, like correctly, and waking up the households. This just brought me back a little bit, because I was just, and also my high school boyfriend was Michael. So when she says Miguel, I was like, oh God, girl, run. So he has been summoned by Tom to talk about an issue that's going on with a wizard who is on Ordeal. And he wants Kit's help with this. And later on, when Kit's sort of like, why couldn't you do it? He's like, I mean, it's just sort of a weird thing for an adult man to, like, constantly be around a kid that he doesn't know and doesn't have reason to know. Like, it's just not a great look. A kid, that makes sense. That's something, and I was like, yeah, that is a really good explanation, actually. You've got to make things feel a little bit natural, or else everybody's going to be like, what the fuck are you doing here, dude? So he goes over there, and it's very unclear exactly what's going on. I should mention, too, that while this is all, this conversation's happening, Carl is, like, struggling with some under cabinet lighting in the kitchen. And, oh my God, talk about other relatable shit. You guys, the past, like, 2-3 weeks, I've been very focused on getting my, my office redone, because I have the amazing desk and treadmill that you guys got me with that GoFundMe. And then I decided that I wanted to stop going to my local gym because nobody wears masks, not even the staff. And I was just fed up with it. So I decided to invest in starting a home gym. And this has led to me just nonstop assembling shit and screwing shit into place and finding studs and wires and all this stuff in order to make sure things function. And I have been so out of my fucking comfort zone. And yet also determined to get this shit done. And the number of times that the lights just go out in this scene, I just found that so funny, because there is nothing quite like the moment you realize that you, like, really fucked up. It's just so disheartening. Kit says, I thought nobody was allowed to interfere with a wizard's ordeal. It's what determines whether you ought to be a wizard in the first place, whether you can run into the lone power and survive. Normally, that's true, Tom said, but ordeals aren't always so clear-cut. They do sometimes go wrong. A resolution can get delayed somehow, or there can be local interference that keeps the resolution from happening. An area's seniors are allowed a certain amount of information about ordeals among probationary wizards who'd be in their catchment who'd be within their catchment area if things went right, especially if something goes wrong in a specific sort of way. A stuck ordeal, or a contaminated one. We have some latitude to step in and try to kick that ordeal back into operation again, while interfering as little as possible. So, once we see this kid, because Kit uses a transit spell and an invisibility sort of spell, a cloaking thing, he goes into the school to track the kid down, and the kid is obviously, like, not entirely present. That's the way that Ponch says that part of him's here, but not all of him. And he gets, like, put onto this bus, and the seatbelt is fastened for him, and he begins to just bang his head repeatedly against the window. And Kit's takeaway from this is really, how unfair is that? This kid clearly is already dealing with some issues, and for him to also be put through an ordeal just feels really rude. And honestly, I totally see his point on that. Like, yeah, that's how I feel a lot of the time about a variety of things, though. It's just like, you know, if somebody's going through, has like a particular issue that is next level difficult in their life, if any additional shit goes wrong, I'm just like, no, that's not allowed. I would like to see the manual, because I'm pretty sure that's not allowed. And so I really felt him on this. Now, I want to preface this with the, you know, acknowledgement. I wouldn't say, I mean, saying neurotypical feels dishonest. I suffer from depression and anxiety, so I guess not really. But I do not believe I am autistic or on the spectrum at all. I've never been diagnosed, so I'm pretty certain I'm not. And I don't have a lot of experience with, like, autism research or friends who have it. I have a few friends with children who suffer from it, but it's not something that particularly, like, comes up how that is experienced for them. And it's such a massive spectrum with such totally different manifestations that I really don't think you can ever say, oh yeah, I know all about autism, because, like, you know, maybe about a few types, but they are always discovering stuff, and they find out that their previous information was wrong all the time. So I just want to say that, I don't know how much of Diane Duane's writing on this is going to be from a place of actual real firsthand knowledge, how much of it's going to be due to research, how much of it's going to be outdated. And feel free, everybody, to chime in with your own understandings of things, or if there's things that, like, she maybe misstates what it's like, or, something she says is, was the accepted wisdom at the time, but has since been disproven. I'm always here for that sort of information. Devin says, I have a quick question. Do you know if you're reading the new Millennium Edition? I don't know. Let me look, because I downloaded the Kindle version. So, let me see. What's this? A Wizard Alone. Let me check. But, yeah, I don't know if... I would imagine the Kindle version is the newest one, right? It doesn't say. The listing on Amazon just says the 6th book in the Young Wizard series. So... I'm not sure, y'all. You'll have to do some investigating. Because I heard the issues with the original, can we discuss that? It's a process, not spoilers. Okay. Yeah, if you guys want to, mention some things. Devin says, a lot of it is researched. She went back and rewrote a lot of this book for the new Millennium Edition because of what you just brought up, and some of what she had written was a bit ableist. Yeah, that's something that... able-bodied and sometimes neurotypical, or just people without the experience in that particular, with that issue, they do not hear the way that they are coming across. And I will say, this maybe is the new Millennium Edition, because I was really pleasantly surprised at how careful she was to not be like, he has to get fixed. There's something wrong with him. Like, there is a moment at which Kit says, what's wrong with him? But he's saying it from the immediate response to seeing this kid banging his head against the window. And after he sort of puts together what he thinks is going on, he doesn't use that sort of language again, which I appreciated. And his conversation with his mother, I thought, was well done, because she's a nurse. So it makes a lot of sense for him to be getting some information from her. And I also like the fact that it gives her a little bit more of a place within this story, because the parents of both of these characters are fascinating to me. Since I am now reaching an age where I could have had a kid this age, I am always thinking about what it must be like for the parents of children with abilities like this, who are called to get involved in incredibly dangerous shit. And denial really probably would be the way that I operated most of the time. Mordecai says, a core part I heard, especially in the original editing, she incorporated a lot of feedback from autistic people. Cool. That's good to know. I always appreciate that. I understand the idea of wanting to keep a writing the same as it, to not try and either run from the fact that you got something wrong as a writer, or wanting to preserve the reality of how the world saw things at the time. So to a degree, deciding to keep things the same, I can sort of understand the thought process behind that in principle. But I really think, unless you're talking about hugely famous classical works that people use as a study for things, I don't think that there's a problem with updating if you know better, if you begin to learn more. And so, yeah, personally, I'm fine with that, and I like to think that I would have done the same thing if I were an author who had people, come at me and be like, that's not great. Jacob says, I went back and read both versions. One obvious difference is that in the new version, Kit reads some blogs by autistic people. Oh, okay, so I'm definitely not reading that version. Because there's no blogs. He just goes to the library. Or wait, maybe he does read a blog at the library. He comes home with a bunch of books. So that's what I sort of focused on. But I think I must be reading it, because now that's ringing a bell. He went into the library, got on the computer. Okay, that works. So let's see. I'm trying to see all of the... There's so much about Kit getting involved in this that's really dangerous, especially when part of the way that he wants to approach things later is with a major focus on actually going inside this kid's mind. What is his name again? The kid that they're after? I feel like it was something sort of familiar. Was it Daryl? I feel like it was Daryl. It was Daryl, says Kelly. Okay. God, that's so funny. It's just like, I just think of Daryl as just such a like older man name. And for a kid to be named Daryl, I'm just like, that's not right. You know? Just, there's some names like that are like Barb in accounting. I just don't think of Barb as like a young person's name. So yeah, the whole like going into his head, I really appreciated his mother being like, look, that might upset him. So just be really ready that part of the deal is autism can interfere with your ability to predict other people's responses to things. And so the thing like that you take for granted, which is if I were to say this thing, she would react in a certain way because she'd be offended or she would be happy or she would take it as a compliment or whatever. Sometimes autism can really like mess with that perception and make it so that people develop those instincts more slowly. And so they'll say things without really thinking about how you would react to them or the effect that they're having by saying that thing. And so just like keep that in mind as well. You may upset him. He won't necessarily be afraid of you, but he may be like, what the fuck are you? And what are you doing here? And I'm not listening to you. Which honestly, same. Somebody shows up in my brain. I mean, I would definitely react with fear, so that's not the same. But I would also just be like, who the fuck do you think you are? Get out. So, let's see. Yeah, in this particular situation, if people start noticing you in the neighborhood around the object of our mutual interest, they won't think too much about it. It's not far enough from your own stamping grounds to provoke suspicion. Whereas if Carl or I went to investigate, notice might be taken. This kind of initial fact-finding is better suited to a wizard of your age. Besides, Carl said, peering up at the bottom of the cupboard, lately you've been evincing a certain talent for finding things. Well, Ponch has, Kit said. I'm not sure he'd be producing these results without you as part of the team, Carl said, as he applied duct tape liberally to the cupboard's underside. Let's not get overly tangled up in details at the moment. Carl, too late. Just too late. So, yeah, he, turns the lights out another couple of times, and then Kit takes off, heads home again. I love Ponch just like being so excited for the chicken that Kit's mom is making for dinner. And Kit went after Ponch and was surprised not to see his mama and Pop eating in the kitchen as they usually did. He wandered into the living room and found them there on the sofa. Kit's Pop was finishing the last of what must have been a second helping of arroz con pollo, watching the TV screen while Kit's mama sat next to him, cross-legged, punching the scan button on the remote and looking at the TV with an expression of extreme bemusement. His father looked up. 5 billion channels and nothing on, he said in a kind of horrified astonishment. The story of modern life, Kit said, resigned. Just because a species is more scientifically advanced than us doesn't mean its TV is any better, believe me. So, I really enjoyed this. There's all kinds of stuff on this that they keep, like, flipping to that, at one point, Kit's like, you might not want to watch a cooking show because they might cook people. Just maybe, just, like, keep an eye out for that. Yeah, I really enjoyed that bit a lot. So, then we go into the second chapter of the 2 investigations. I've talked a lot about this chapter already because this is when Kit actually sees Daryl for the first time and begins to assess what he should do and how to handle it. But the chapter begins with us being inside of one of Nita's nightmares. And this is so well written, you guys. So there's this description of how she didn't like circuses as a kid, and how it wasn't really totally clear to her what it was about them that scared her so badly. I'm going to read this. The darkness, the gradually strengthening smells of sawdust, animal sweat, grease paint, and canvas. The spotlight that left too many other things purposely obscure, while half-seen forms moved in those shadows, themselves concealed by the light. All these slowly combined to suggest that something unexpected, something unavoidable was going to happen, and that looming unknown frightened Nita badly. So she, like, the first time that she went to the circus, she got her father to take her home early. Her sister stayed with her mom. And she had had nightmares for a while about clowns and, just the whole thing. And later on, she sort of would think back and just be like, what the hell was that about? Like, that sudden fear. Even now, sometimes the mere sight of a spotlight aimed at an empty floor, with darkness lying silent beyond it, was enough to induce in her a feeling of tremendous foreboding that would darken her soul for hours. I love this because it's a really beautifully written, way of describing strange fears. There's nothing distinct that you can point to as a genuine threat. Right? It's not like, oh, she thought that there was a monster in the dark. It's not that concrete. It's simply, there's darkness. That's it. The darkness is there. And there's like a boundary that's very clear. And the light makes it difficult to even see into that darkness. Who knows what's there is the implication. And that is how fears tend to work. It's much less about a definitive, I'm afraid of getting bitten by something. I'm afraid, it's just a general, what if something's there? And that fucking spoke to me. She kept coming back to the clowns. To Nita, there was a fake quality about them. Nothing genuinely humorous. It was strange to think that someone seriously thought that makeup could make you funny. But there was no question in Nita's mind that makeup could make you scary. The stylized clown face, too generic, too cartoony, that really bothered her. The baggy, motley costume disguising the real body shape so that it could have been a bare steel skeleton underneath instead of flesh and bone. The slapstick jokes endlessly repeated, which were supposed to be amusing because of the repetition. All these left Nita cold. There was something mechanical about clowns, something automatic, a kind of robot humor, and it gave her the creeps. So that's her description of clowns, and I really feel like that gets to the fucking heart of the matter. I am not a fan of clowns personally. I wouldn't say that I have a fear of them, but I think that they are terrible. And, that imagery is often used because so many people sort of have this reaction to clowns. So she's in this dream, she's watching this clown bicycling on a tiny bicycle in circles that are smaller and smaller. Around and around and around in jerkily wobbling movements, around and around went the clown. It had a painted black tear running down its face. The red painted mouth was turned down, but the face under the white grease paint mask was as immobile as a marble statue's, expressionless, plastered in place. Only the eyes were alive. They shouted, "I can't get off! I can't get off!" And just this once, the clown didn't think it was funny either. The drum roll went on and on, as if for a hanging rather than a circus stunt. The chain of the bicycle rattled relentlessly in the silence inside the light. Beyond the light, in the darkness, the heartless crowd laughed and clapped and cheered. And through the sound of their applause, low but building, came the growl of the tiger pacing behind the bars, waiting its turn. The drum roll never stopped. The clown rode in tighter and tighter circles, faster and faster. The wheels of the bike began to scream. The crowd shouted for more. "Stop it!" Nita yelled. "Stop it! Can't you see it's killing him?" "As often as possible," growled the tiger, "and never often enough." The crowd roared louder. "Stop it!" Nita shouted, but now they were drowning her out, too. "Stop it! Stop!" And then she wakes up. Whew. That is a well-written nightmare. Nightmares, like, just the simple act of frightening somebody via the written word is a lot harder than people think it is. And I found this to be deeply fucking affecting. This was just really, really well done. I felt like I was in it, you know? And that sense of you seeing that something is wrong and other people within the dream not being able to tell, that is something I think a lot of us have had. Like, it can manifest in a bunch of ways. Trying to, like, run and you can't move. Trying to scream at somebody and you can't make a sound. Like, telling somebody something and it seems like they don't hear you or can't hear you or are misunderstanding you. Trying to drive a car and it's like the brakes were cut or the steering wheel doesn't work. Just the loss of control, really. And the fact that everybody else seems to be oblivious and that it's all on you to, like, keep this from going wrong. Yeah, I feel that a lot. And I love that when she realizes that she, like, woke herself up with this screaming, she just prays that nobody is going to come and try and comfort her. And that's another thing, is like, for some people, they want to know that people care. And having somebody come comfort them would be exactly the answer that they're looking for. And then there's people like me and like Nita who are like, no, leave me alone in my misery because I can't, you know? And she talks a little bit about how everybody's dealing with the death of her mother in, like, really weird sleep patterns. And Doreen is, like, not sleeping often, but when she does, she sleeps really hard. And that her dad had been having trouble sleeping, and now he sleeps all the time. And I'm going to read this, and I might start crying because this killed me. It didn't take a wizard to figure out that he'd been afraid to fall asleep because of who he would again and again not find beside him when he woke up. Finally, his body had overruled that kind of behavior, and now was trying to sleep too much to not wake up at all, if possible. The reasons were the same, and just thinking of them made Nita want to cry all over again. Ugh, you guys. That hit me so hard. Ugh. She could have used wizardry to combat the sleep disturbances, but the manual had told her plainly that this would be counterproductive. Easing others' pain is one thing. Willfully trying to avoid experiencing one's own is another, and has its own price, too high for the intelligent wizard to pay. It was smarter to let the hurt discharge naturally, without interfering. But these common-sense counsels were still no comfort in the middle of the night, when she was alone in the dark. All Nita could do was wipe her face repeatedly, dry her eyes on the pillow, and hope to fall asleep eventually. Lacking that, she'd lie there and wait for dawn. I wished life were normal again, but she knew that the old kind of normal was never going to come back. She would have to make a new one. And that's all we see of her in this section. We go back to Kit here, and we have the whole thing, first of all, with a history quiz from a guy that everybody has nicknamed Machiavelli. There's a basketball player that he's friendly with named Raul, who has nicknamed him KF for Kit Fox. And they seem to be kind of, like, friendly, and this dude has asked Kit, like, how Nita's doing, which I kind of liked, that he's just checking up on her a little bit, and also noticing that, like, Kit's a bit upset and assumes that's why. And yeah, this whole, like, I feel like there has to be something about this history class that's going to come up, but as of right now, I have no idea. It just ends with, like, them having this pop quiz, and him saying, remind me not to go to sub-Saharan Africa in the 1800s. After today, just seeing it would make me come down with post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that going to come up? So this is when he goes home, he tracks down this kid, realizes that there's something going on with him, Then he goes to the library and gets a bunch of information. And he goes home and his mother spots the books. And begins to talk to him about all of the variations of autism and how many things are, not fully understood, and all of the theories that sort of, the way that she says it is basically they may all be true. Like, who knows? And Kit asks her to call him into school and ask for the day off because he needs a full day to get into this kid's head and talk to him. There's no real way to do it otherwise. So she agrees to it, and I really like the distinction where she says, I'll call and tell them you're sick. And he tells her, no, just tell them I need a personal day. And she seems to really approve of the fact that he doesn't want to, even tell that white lie, And the chapter ends with, thanks, Mama, you're the best. He got up and kissed her and took her coffee cup. You want some more? Yes. His mother leaned back on the sofa. 2 sugars. And then I want you to explain to me why I can hear the DVD player and the remote yelling at each other in Japanese in the middle of the night. Oh, man, that's pretty good. I like that. So that is the end of that chapter. And then reminder, because breaking these up is really weird and tricky, I'm going to just be covering 1 chapter next time, which that'll be a bit, let's see. Yeah, because if I cover 2 chapters next time, that is 90 pages. It would be too much, but I don't want to cut a chapter into parts. So the next episode, I'm going to cover a short section. And that will leave, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 more episodes would be necessary to wrap this entire book up. So just an FYI to those of you who are interested, we have 1 more episode booked right now, but that's it. So if y'all are wanting me to continue on this series, you're going to want to get on that. I think that's it. Yeah, I feel like there was something else I was going to mention about something with Paunch, but I can't remember. I think I pretty much talked about him though. All right. So thank you again, all of you, so much for listening, for hanging out in the chat with me. Thank you very much to Kelly for commissioning this. I hope y'all are enjoying it. And hopefully we're going to be able to get to the end of this book. Fingers crossed. And until next time in March, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.